Hello and a very warm welcome to World's Panorama, the show that gives you a 360-degree view of major global events of the week. I'm Sana Khan. Before we move ahead, here's a look at this week's top stories. Crisis continues for the US in Afghanistan after Afghan president accuses them of not cooperating with probe into civilian massacre. Rick Santorum deals a blow to Mitt Romney in the Republican presidential race with 2 victories in America's Deep South. Thomas Lubanga found guilty of recruiting child soldiers, ICC to seek maximum punishment for the Congolese warlord. And in sports, Manchester United crashes out of the Europa League, loses 5-3 on aggregate to Athletic Bilbao. With that, our focus this week is the strained relationship between the US and Afghanistan. First, its army faced protests over Qurans being burnt at a NATO base, and now the massacre of 16 Afghans, allegedly by a US soldier, has seen a backlash against its forces. With the soldier being flown out of Afghanistan, the war of words between the two countries has only intensified. We will be discussing the US-Afghan relationship with a special guest I have with me in the studio, Professor Happy Mon Jacob. He's the assistant professor at the Center for International Politics in JNU. But before we kick off that discussion, take a look at this report.
The shooting spree by an American soldier killing 16 villagers in the southern province of Kandahar has snowballed into a massive crisis for the US. The US had to send its Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, the most senior US official, to visit Afghanistan since the shootings to contain the fallout.
Obviously, we were all deeply shocked and saddened by the event that occurred there. And again, I want to express our deepest condolences to the families, to the Afghan people, to the villages that were impacted by this event, and the terrible loss of life that took place.
The incident has triggered angry reactions from Afghans, prompting calls for immediate exit of US forces, even as Washington tried to negotiate a long-term presence to keep Afghanistan from sliding into chaos again. Panetta tried to reassure Afghans that the US was on the right path and that despite these kinds of events, US strategy in Afghanistan should not be undermined.
I do not believe that there is any reason at this point to make any changes with regards to our strategy and for the process of drawing down.
There are going to be multiple challenges along the way. In terms of pace, I don't anticipate at this stage that we're going to be making any sudden additional changes to the plan that we currently have.
US military officials announced on Wednesday that the soldiers had been flown out of Afghanistan. Afghan lawmakers have demanded that the alleged shooter be handed over to them to face a public trial in the country. Despite an apology from President Barack Obama, who called the incident a mistake, Afghan President Hamid Karzai does not seem to be in a forgiving mood. The attack is one in a series of US missteps and violent outbreaks. They've come at a time when the anti-US sentiment in Afghanistan is at an all-time high, following the burning of Quran at a NATO base in Kabul last month.
All right, Professor Jacob, let me put the first question to you straight away. The US-Afghan relationship has increasingly grown sort of frayed and tattered on the edges, and several factors really contributing to that. Could you list out some of them for us, please?
Absolutely. I think Hamid Karzai's anger and outrage is completely understandable. Hamid Karzai has never been a very powerful man in control of neither Kabul nor the heartland of Afghanistan. Jokingly, people say that he's the daytime mayor of Kabul.
Okay.
That has been the kind of power that he had in Afghanistan. So on the one hand, you had the Taliban and other militias killing people at random in Afghanistan, and suddenly the Americans were brought in and the NATO troops were brought in to sort of take care of the people there. Now they are indulging in human rights violations. They are indulging in such inexcusable acts, and therefore he has every reason to be angry. Number one. Number two, I think there's a larger reason behind this kind of anger that Hamid Karzai is showing today. We have been seeing the negotiations between the United States government and Taliban taking place in Qatar in the last few months. And Hamid Karzai has not been a very happy person with regard to this particular negotiation happening between these two.
Right.
He initially said, "I'm not going to be party to it. I don't want this to happen, etc., etc." But the Americans insisted, and therefore he had to sort of okay this. The Pakistanis are also not very happy with it. So there is a deeper anger that Hamid Karzai has with the Americans at this point of time. Thirdly, the breakdown of the relationship between the Pakistanis and the Americans have also not been very good for the Karzai regime, primarily because one doesn't know who is talking to who. So there's a complete what do you say? There's complete uncertainty about what is likely to happen in the next 2 years, which is run up to the end game. I wouldn't call it the end game. I would call it the middle game.
Okay.
As it were. So in this kind of uncertainty, Hamid Karzai is not sure what is going to be his fate, what is going to be the fate of the remnants of the Karzai administration.
So essentially he's becoming very uneasy, and hence the, anger against the US, which has suddenly become very prominent. But also, frustration is also growing amongst the NATO allies as well as the Afghan government. Do you think that could really affect, the timetable to turn over the security responsibilities as far as Afghanistan is concerned?
It depends on a lot of things. Number one, I think the Afghan National Army, how soon are they going to have a certain number of Afghan national troops in Afghanistan who can take care of the security in Afghanistan? I think that's a key. The NATO forces and the Americans are for sure going to withdraw from Afghanistan. There's no doubt about that.
Yes.
I mean, they have had enough, and they are not sure whether they're negotiating from a position of strength or whether they're negotiating from a position of weakness. And you wait longer, it is more likely that the NATO forces and the Americans are going to talk to the Taliban from a position of weakness, and they don't want really that to happen at all. So the withdrawal will happen, the drawdown of troops will happen, and that's certainly going to start off in 2014. Will this have an impact on the planned drawdown in Afghanistan? I don't think so. I think in the days to come, in the months to come, Karzai is, after all, an American-backed president of Afghanistan. He is not otherwise a very well recognized and legitimate ruler of Afghanistan. So there is no way that Karzai can, beyond a point, show his anger to the Americans. This is basically a face that he has to put on.
And now, one can't deny the fact that the neighbors are very, very closely watching what's happening in Afghanistan and the relationship between the US and Afghanistan. What would you say? How is India and Pakistan, for example, looking at things, and could they possibly, act or do something in the near future as far as the situation is concerned, especially Pakistan?
Absolutely. Let me start off with Pakistan, and I'll then eventually come to India. I mean, when you look at the question of Pakistan's interest in Afghanistan, traditionally they have had very, very clear strategic interest in Afghanistan, be it the question of the Durand line, which even the Taliban never accepted, existing between the Pakistanis and the Afghanis, number one. Number two, the question of Pashtun nationalism. Ever since the 1970s, the Afghan leadership has tried to make the Pakistanis uneasy and edgy, talking about the Pashtun nationalism and Pashtunistan. And thirdly, the Pakistanis have always famously talked about strategic depth that Pakistan needs in case of a conflict with India in Afghanistan, etc., etc. So Pakistan has had this traditional sort of interest in Afghanistan. They have been working based on this kind of a premise and logic. But now at this point of time, what is that the Pakistanis are looking at vis-a-vis Afghanistan? Number one, I think they want to have a manageable kind of regime in Afghanistan. They want to have parts of Taliban incorporated into the administration in Kabul. They want their people to be holding important posts in the provinces, at least in some provinces, number one. Number two, they also want to certainly avoid the blowback effect of whatever is happening in Afghanistan on Pakistan itself. The linkage between, for example, the Pakistan Taliban, which is TTP, and the Afghan Taliban. They want to make sure that there is a clear distinction between these two, that they support Afghan Taliban and not TTP and not Pakistan Taliban. They also want to make sure that there is a disjuncture between the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. So the Pakistanis have been working towards that. And number three, the Pakistanis also want to avoid that avoid an eventuality wherein India gains in prominence in Afghanistan.
Right.
And with that, let me sort of come to the question of India. Indians for a very long time traditionally actually said that we have very, very clear strategic security interests in Afghanistan which are non-negotiable. They have also said that there is nothing called a moderate Taliban. So therefore you can't talk to the Taliban. There is either Taliban or no Taliban. You can't have a moderate Taliban. That's an oxymoron. That was the traditional Indian argument. Thirdly, Indians also debated at various points of time whether or not to project force into Afghanistan.
Right.
Because we have about $2 billion invested in Afghanistan. We have a lot of reconstruction workers in Afghanistan. So do we not back them up? Do we not secure them by sending out troops there? On all these three, I think the Indians have also realized that that's not really going to happen. And therefore, they are today talking about the possibility of talking to some moderate Taliban, some people within the Taliban leadership. They're also today talking about the need to separate between security interests in Afghanistan, security involvement in Afghanistan, and non-security involvement in Afghanistan. Today, India is happy to deal with question of education, question of training Afghan civil servants, Afghan military men.
So essentially, you know, what's happening in Afghanistan has very strong bearing on, you know, how things are in India and Pakistan and what they plan to do next as far as, you know, the situation in the area is concerned. But to conclude things, now you've seen the latest killings in Afghanistan by the US soldier. Afghanistan is still pressing for the soldiers' trial to be in Afghanistan. There's a lot of conflict over there. How do you see things in the coming days? You mentioned there's a lot of uncertainty, but still.
Absolutely. No, I think, first of all, I don't think the Americans are going to give up on their soldier and have him tried in Afghanistan. That's impossible. The Americans have never done that and they will never do that.
In fact, the soldier has already reached...
He's in Kuwait and he's on his way to the United States of America. So that's really not going to happen. As I said earlier, this is only a momentary crisis. You know, they will live past this. The relationship between the partnership between Afghanistan, which is Karzai, and the United States administration is going to come back to track. There's no doubt about that. I think the bigger question here is how is the relationship between the United States and Pakistan is going to evolve, and what impact will that have on Afghanistan, and what is India's role in all of this, along with that of the role of the Iranians. So how this is going to play out, the Americans are forcing the Indians not to cooperate with Iran, the Pakistanis are courting the Iranians, so there's a lot of games going on, the great
Professor
game
Jacob,
going on
we hope
here.
to have you sometime soon on the show again and discuss and deliberate on these questions as you've just put them very, very beautifully. Thanks so much for joining me again on the show today. With that, it's time for a very short break, but up next, Congolese warlord Thomas Lubanga. He's found guilty of recruiting child soldiers. We'll be back with that story on the other side of the break. Thanks for staying with us here on World Panorama. Now, just 3 months shy of its 10th birthday, the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, in The Hague, has handed down its first verdict. On Wednesday, its 3-judge trial chamber found Thomas Lubanga Dailo, a Congolese warlord, guilty of abducting children and of forcing them to serve as soldiers, a war crime. Here's a look.
The International Criminal Court on Wednesday found Congolese warlord Thomas Lubanga Dailo guilty of recruiting and using child soldiers between 2002 and 2003. Dailo betrayed no emotion as the presiding judge, Adrian Fulford, read out the verdict. In a unanimous decision, the 3 judges said evidence proved that as head of the Union of Congolese Patriots and its military wing, Lubanga had been responsible for the conscription of child soldiers on the front line.
Lubanga Armed Group recruit, train, and use hundreds of young children to kill, pillage, and rape.
Those who testified against him included former child soldiers who told the court that he recruited them to kill, rape, and rob their victims. But Lubanga said he was a politician rather than a warlord and had never played any active role in the UPC's militia.
There are fools everywhere and over there. There are few who have been arrested from our side. We will explain to the French it is the fault of the boys.
Rights groups welcomed Lubanga's prosecution but said the progress had been too slow. The case will set legal precedents that could be used if Joseph Kony, the elusive leader of the Ugandan rebel group, the Lord's Resistance Army, is captured and brought to justice.
Kony 2012 does not actually reflect what happened according to, in relation to what you told us you would show us and what the world may be knowing. They would have taken the coverage from Uganda, in northern Uganda particularly, to show to reflect exactly what happened, how the axes were being deepened inside the heads, the brains of human beings.
Analysts hope this verdict would send out a clear message to armies and rebels around the world that conscripting children breaches international law.
While in the US, the race for Republican presidential candidature is getting closer, with Rick Santorum making a strong comeback against frontrunner Mitt Romney. For conservative hopeful Newt Gingrich, though, it looks all but over. Here's the latest on the US elections.
Republican presidential hopeful Rick Santorum bolstered his White House hopes with key Republican primary victories in the Deep South. Rick Santorum won the Mississippi and Alabama primaries, upsetting frontrunner Mitt Romney once again.
We will compete everywhere. We will compete everywhere. The time is now for conservatives to pull together. The time is now to make sure that we have the best chance to win this election. And the best chance to win this election is to nominate a conservative to go up against Barack Obama, who can take him on every issue.
Santorum's double win also dashed the comeback hopes of conservative rival Newt Gingrich. Pressure is now growing on Gingrich to throw in the towel so that Santorum can consolidate conservatives in challenging leading candidate Mitt Romney, who finished third in both states.
The fact is, in both states, the conservative candidates got nearly 70% of the vote. And if you're the front runner and you keep coming in third, you're not much of a front runner.
Santorum won 33% in Mississippi to 31% for Gingrich and 30% for Romney. In Alabama, Santorum had 35% and Gingrich and Romney each had 29%. Romney, though, is still way ahead of his rivals with more than 450 delegates in his kitty. Unsurprisingly, Team Romney is emphasizing the delegate count because even in losing, their man has moved closer towards the winning line. But it's not within reach yet, and it would suit Romney perfectly if Newt Gingrich stays in.
On to this grim report from Europe now. In a major human tragedy in Switzerland, a Belgian school bus carrying 52 people crashed late on Tuesday night as it was returning from a school-organized ski trip in Switzerland. 28 people died, including 22 children, all aged around 12.
Belgium came to a halt for a minute in remembrance of 28 victims killed in a bus crash. Flags flew at half-mast as the grieved nation paid tribute to 22 school children. Memorial services were held across Belgium as the bodies of the victims arrived.
There are no words for it. There is only silence. And we can hope that the parents and the grandparents become better after some time. But I think it will last 20 years.
Amidst grief and sorrow, there was anger against the Swiss authorities over the delay in handling bodies.
It appears because the Swiss government is not giving the permission that the dead bodies are leaving the Swiss country. Our mayor was furious that in a civil a country with civilization that we have to wait such a long time before we know the exact names, before we know definitely the situation.
A Belgian school bus carrying 52 people crashed late on Tuesday night as it returned from a school-organized ski trip in Switzerland. 28 people died, including 22 children, all aged around 12. 3 of the 24 children injured are still in a critical condition. Swiss authorities are still investigating the cause of the accident.
Time for a very short break now in World Panorama, but when we come back, we'll get you details of another tragedy in Bangladesh. Welcome back. Let's now take a look at some of the other developments across the globe.
Iran welcomed a new round of nuclear negotiations with 6 world powers on Wednesday, saying the two sides should mutually set the date and venue of the talks. Last week, European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton had accepted Iran's offer of further talks on the future of Iran's nuclear activities. In a letter to Ashton, Iran's nuclear negotiator Saeed Jalali had emphasized the need to hold serious talks without preconditions, with the aim of achieving permanent cooperation. Iran has repeatedly rejected Western accusations that its nuclear energy program is a cover for developing nuclear weapons, insisting its goals are entirely peaceful. French President Nicolas Sarkozy has sought to reassure expatriate voters that they would not be hit by his promise of a crackdown on wealthy tax exiles if re-elected next May 6th. Sarkozy had promised to establish a new tax linked to nationality to prevent rich taxpayers from leaving the country and taking up residency in other countries with lower tax rates. Tax specialists feel the proposal was mere symbolic and would be extremely difficult to implement. Sarkozy's main rival, Holland, also said the proposal was nothing more than an illusion. A series of earthquakes rattled Tokyo and northeastern Japan on Wednesday evening, raising memories of last year's devastating tsunami. But there was no apparent damage or injury. The strongest quake measured had a magnitude of 6.8 and struck off Hokkaido Island and generated a small tsunami. There were no abnormalities reported at any nuclear plants after the quakes, although nearly all of Japan's nuclear plants were offline for safety inspections. A Bangladeshi ferry that sank after hitting an oil barge was salvaged on Wednesday along with scores of bodies, taking the toll to 138 with dozens of people still missing. The Dhaka-bound MV Sharatpur was carrying more than 250 people when it capsized early on Tuesday in the Meghna River. Rescue vessels found the ferry in about 70 feet of water and managed to pull it to the riverbank. More people are still believed to be trapped inside.
With that, it's now time to gear up for some sports action in our next report.
Manchester United and Manchester City crashed out of the Europa League on Thursday. United were beaten 2-1 by Athletic Bilbao, the Spanish side reaching their first European quarter-final in 35 years after a 5-3 aggregate victory. Manchester City, meanwhile, lost to Sporting Lisbon. United and City's double blow left Chelsea, who reached the Champions League quarter-finals on Wednesday, as England's only remaining representative in Europe this season. England's Justin Rose claimed the 4th US PGA Tour win at the WGC Cadillac Championship. The Hampshire golfer stood 3 shots back at the start of play, trailing overnight leader Bubba Watson. But with Watson fading, world number 1 Rory McIlroy's late charge falling short and Tiger Woods retiring with an Achilles injury, Rose held his nerve. A final round 2 under 70 was enough to win the title for Justin Rose. Triple Olympic champion Stephanie Rice shrugged off a nagging shoulder injury to book her ticket to London by roaring to the Australian 400 metres individual medley title. After trailing Samantha Hamill, the 23-year-old world record holder assumed control in the backstroke and powered home to post a world-class time of 4 minutes 33.45 seconds. Rice, who also holds the 200-metre Olympic title, finished more than 4 seconds in front of runner-up Blair Evans and was full of confidence after sealing her 6th straight national title.
And well, what's the latest in showbiz and lifestyle? Here's a quick look.
Entertainment stars like Justin Bieber, Ellen DeGeneres, Johnny Depp and Meryl Streep have joined up with leaders in fashion, sports, business and politics in support of Katie Butler's campaign against the MPAA's decision to give the documentary Bully an R rating. Butler launched a campaign on the website change.org to have the MPAA rating changed so that it can be screened in schools. The MPAA gave the documentary an R rating because of the language in the film, which tells the story of bullying in schools. Veteran rocker Bruce Springsteen and his E Street Band took their legendary sound to the Apollo Theatre in New York on March 9th. The special one-night-only concert was attended by some of Springsteen's biggest fans. including celebrities Tom Hanks and his family, TV personality Gayle King, singer Ruben Blades, designer Tommy Hilfiger, and actor Ed Burns. Some of the proceeds from the concert will benefit Why Hunger, a non-profit organization that fights against hunger and poverty around the world. Britain's charismatic Prince Harry played a charity polo match on Sunday in his last official event in Brazil. The fundraising event in Sao Paulo state was aimed at helping local charity campaigns for Brazilian children and orphans in the small African country of Lesotho. In Rio de Janeiro, the prince played rugby on the beach and visited a pacified slum with dancing samba queens. Harry's 3-day trip to Brazil was aimed at launching a campaign called GREAT that promotes the United Kingdom and tourism in the region. Wedding bells are in the offing for French actor Oliver Martins and Oscar-winning actress Halle Berry. Martins confirmed that he and Berry are engaged to be married at the opening of his new South Beach restaurant. Berry and Martins have been dating since 2010 when they worked together on the film Dark Tide, due for release this year.
Well, that's a wrap on this edition of World Panorama. As I go, I leave you with visuals of the state dinner held at the White House for visiting British Prime Minister David Cameron and First Lady. Thanks for watching.